don't care how much the world tries to make this church and gospel and Christian thing something that's hokey-pokey and insignificant, I come to tell you that God is real. That the promises of God are true. And the responsibilities of man towards God is great. So one of the points that Paul tries to instill into their psyche and to drive home to them is, number one, who God is. And number two, their response to his godness. Are you still with me?
Yes, sir.
Because we know, based upon what the scripture says, that they had some knowledge of God. Because Paul very clearly says that when they knew God. So there was a point in time that they really knew God. And there's a big difference in knowing something about God and knowing God. It's a big difference, and we have to make that clear and distinct, and we have to draw the line of demarcation, because oftentimes people think that when they simply come to church and they have been taught as a child a few things about God, that that gives them a pass to make the statement that I know God. God knowledge and knowing God only comes through an intimate relationship with God. You don't get to know God by singing. You don't get to know God by clapping your hands. But you get to know God by the experience of the relationship that you have with God. And you never get so deep in God, and you never know so much about God that there's not room for God to magnify or expand himself in your life. It's a lifetime of learning and knowing and begetting and understanding and coming into more knowledge about who God really is. Because what we have in the Bible is just a glimpse of the totality of the essence of God. Because John began to write, and John said, I suppose that even if everything that God done was put on paper and we had wrote it with a pen, that even the books of the world would not be able to contain it. Because God is just that magnanimous. God is that big, he is that wide, he's that broad, and he's that deep that you can narrate everything that there is to him. God reveals enough to us about him to, number one, strengthen our faith and to give us hope, and to also give us a guarantee that when this life is over, that we can expect to go to that prepared place that God has prepared for his people. So when Paul begins to write and begins to dialogue here, we find that he begins to catapult the readers of this particular letter into the subject matter that is of a great importance to all of us. He begins to talk about the righteous relationship that we are to have with our God. There is a certain rightness that needs to be in place into every child of God's life. Understanding the fact that the very basis for our need of God is based upon the fact that we were not right with God. We came into this world already separated from the love of God and the relationship of God based upon Adam, who sold all of us out in the Garden of Eden. So we have to clearly understand that it's not about what I no longer do or what I have never ever done. I don't care if your life is as clean as a house too. You still need God. And you are as just as wrong in the eyes of God as the fellow that's on the corner selling drugs and murdering and raping and maiming folks. We are just as out of touch with God as they are. So it's not about what you don't do that means that you are right with God. Isaiah teaches us that our righteousness, it is as filthy rags. When you've done your best to live right, if there's no relationship with God, you are still dirty. That don't mean that you don't have morals. It doesn't mean that you don't have principles. But you are out of connection with God. And you can only be connected to God by being born again of the water and of the Spirit. So the necessity then of needing a relationship with God to begin with is based upon us coming into this world already disconnected and alienated from the commonwealth of Israel. Now the reason why that they did what they did and why they do what we do is because that for the most part we are not right. I'm talking about prior to coming to God. And hopefully that is not the case after you are born again of the water and of the Spirit. Oh, there's a great responsibility upon the child of God to do all that you've been empowered to do, to live a life that's free and separated from sin. Does not the Bible say to know to do good and to do it not, it is sin? We've got to understand that God doesn't give us no free passage once we come into the knowledge of the truth. You can no longer make an excuse because according to the writing of the word, that all excuses have been nailed to the cross. You got to further understand that God no longer is winking upon the unrighteousness of the people of God. When in Acts chapter 17, Luke said he's commanding it everywhere to in fact repent. The children of Israel, they said, our fathers have eaten sour bread, and now the children's teeth are set on edge. But this thing is not about your forefathers. It's not about mom and dad, because your daddy was no good. Don't mean that you can't do good. And it doesn't mean that you have a right to reject God and to push him out of your life. Because at the end of the day, and every day of your life, you really need God. If it wasn't for God touching your body, you wouldn't even wake up in the morning. If God would withdraw the strength of your lungs, you would never be able to inhale and exhale. That's how much you need God. So then, the remainder of the book of Romans, it tells us what's involved in this righteous standing with God. The righteousness then that God brings into being is made possible by faith. You remember the story of Abraham, don't you? It's not that Abraham was right with God, but it was because of Abraham's faith. It was accounted unto him as righteousness. God gave him a command, and he stepped out in blind faith. Even though his obedience to the commandment of God was partial, it was still satisfactory in the eyes of God. So much so that God put a label on him and called him the father of the faithful. We are in fact the children of Abraham. We have the connection that we need to God through Abraham. We are in fact in the plan of God as it relates to the promises that God had made to Abraham. Everything that God promised him, you and I as the adopted sons and daughters of God have access by faith into these very promises. The Bible says there is no good thing that he will withhold to them that walk uprightly before you. So it's all about our righteous standing in the economy and in the mind of God. You've got to further understand that even though this righteousness is brought to existence by faith, you've got to burn this in your mind. This is the reason why that Paul stresses the fact that we ought to live our life from faith to faith, because your entry faith is not going to be the same kind of faith that's going to sustain you all the way through your walk with God. Just believing that God is enough to get you into the door, but you got to move from the fundamental principles of the doctrine of Jesus Christ and go on unto perfection. Well, let me say it this way. After you receive the baptism of the Holy Ghost, you don't need that kind of faith anymore, because you've already believed and you received. But now I need faith to help me to get over every stumbling block and turn them into stepping stones. As I begin to grow in my faith relationship with my God, I need the faith of God to help me to triumph over the adversary on every side. I need a deeper level of faith that when I'm confronted with the challenge, do I go to the right or do I go to the left? I need enough power in the faith that I have in my God to know that God will get me through the situation. He'll bring me through the Red Sea. He'll get me over the mountain if I still believe and don't turn away and embrace His word and trust in Him and walk with Him in the beauty of holiness. So I need faith every step of the way with my God. Because there is a generalized faith, and then there is a specific faith. You can have a generalized faith to believe that there is a specific faith that you need. If you're sick in your body and you need God to heal you, you don't need a general faith. You need a specific faith to know that God is a healer. Because everybody that believes that God is may not necessarily believe that God is a healer. Everybody that believes that God is a healer may not necessarily believe that God is a deliverer. Even the Apostle Paul himself, as he began to walk to and fro, he cried out, "Oh, wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death?" You got to know that God is your deliverer. He is the one that will bring you out. He began to use Moses down in Egypt land to show the power and the strength of his ability to deliver. And I don't care how strong the devil might be holding you, there is a God that's omnipotent that has all power in the palm of his hand. And if you will put your hand in his hand, I guarantee you God will bring you out of it. And because you come out of peace, don't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to avoid your trip through the wilderness. But there again, you need faith. So the Lord told Moses, I want you to speak to the people and tell them don't become discouraged because of the way. You got to understand in your heart that God will bring you through it. He will bring you through it. He's our great provider. And I tell you all the time that nothing surprises God. If nothing catches God off base, nothing will catch him by surprise. When they left out of Egypt, he knew that Edom was down the road. He knew that Mara was down the road. He knew that they were going to have a difficult time believing that they were able to make it to the promised land. But if God said yes, even if the devil say no, you going to make it. You got to make it. Your family will be blessed. Your marriage will be blessed. Your home will be blessed. Your body will be blessed. If God said it, that's so. So then, the fact of the matter is this, that they just have to live by faith. And it's inferred in that statement that our faith in God, it begins to activate the faithfulness of God. And the problem that, as I see it, that we're confronted with in today's text, it seems that awesomeness and the power of God have been relegated what you saw to something or somebody that's not even close to being connected to God. How in the world can you see the beauty of all of creation and then just say something silly like this just happened overnight? How can you look at the complexity of the makeup of the human being and then turn around and make a derogatory ignorant statement saying that man came from a monkey? Don't you know one thing? That we are so high on God's order of creation that we were made just slightly lower than the angels. When you think about how your body is designed to heal